welcome everyone to this INI 2020 virtual curtain raiser. When the curtains will actually be raised, we don't know, but it's exciting to see the numbers of you that have signed up and that are attending. My name's David Cantor. I'm Vice Chair of INI and an Assistant Professor of Environmental Studies at NYU. And before handing it off to Raghuram and Marcus for the official welcome, I do want to be the first to thank you all for attending today's event. I think I speak for the steering committee, the organizing committee, to say that we're really pleased to see such a high level of interest. And obviously we would have much preferred to see all of you in person in Berlin, but that will happen. We also hope, most importantly, that you and your families are doing okay in these scary and uncertain times. And you'll have seen from the agenda that this is a 2-hour event. So we'll have a welcome from Marcus and Raghuram. We'll do a couple of videos. We have 2 great keynotes and then a very exciting roundtable discussion from people across every conceivable time zone. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat bar and in the Q&A, and I will do my best to keep up with them. But first, let me introduce you to Raghuram and Marcus, who will welcome you all. So Marcus Goipel has spent more than 10 years as a scientific advisor at the German Environment Agency. And that agency acts at the interface between science and policy in Germany and consults the German Ministry for the Environment in the development of environmental policies. Marcus is the co-chair of the expert panel on nitrogen budgets for the Task Force on Reactive Nitrogen, which is part of the Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution. And following his long-term engagement in various policy-relevant nitrogen science processes, including the European Nitrogen Assessment and the INMS project, he was happy to take and we were very happy for him to take the leading role in organizing INI 2020 in Berlin. Raghuram is the chair of INI, the International Nitrogen Initiative, and a professor of biotechnology at the Guru Gobind Singh Indraprastha University in New Delhi in India. And he co-led the Indian Nitrogen Assessment, is currently co-leading the South Nitrogen Assessment. He's also part of the steering committee, member of the UNEP Global Partnership on Nutrient Management, and a trustee of the Sustainable India Trust. Raghuram and Marcus, I hand over to you. And perhaps Raghuram, maybe you want to go first.
Thank you, David. Welcome to all to the Curtain Raiser webinar in place of the postponed 8th International Nitrogen Conference, INI 2020 in Berlin, which has been postponed due to COVID-19. It's a historic day. On this day in 1886, trade unionists placed bullets in Chicago Haymarket Square to get us the 8-hour working day for the next 2 centuries, except when Corona hit us and confined us to our homes. But if the attendance of this webinar is any proof, we have more than 300 already and more than 500 registered. This attendance shows that we have defeated COVID-19 in the nitrogen community. To be fair, COVID-19 has also showed us that a pollution-free world is possible, with pollution levels down to half or even lesser. INI has been advocating global cooperation on nitrogen pollution for nearly 2 decades through its 7 triennial conferences and declarations. But this INI 2020 is very unique because we achieved a lot since the last conference in Melbourne. Thanks to the GEF UNEP project on International Nitrogen Management System involving the past and the current office bearers of INI, Mark will tell you more about it. We are conducting global nitrogen assessment with strong regional foundations. We hope it will be out in 2 years' time. The first ever comprehensive Indian nitrogen assessment was published in 2017. A few months earlier, China published a summarized version of its own nitrogen assessment in Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences. Thanks to the South Asia Cooperative Environment Program, we garnered regional cooperation for a nitrogen resolution in the United Nations. And thanks to Sri Lanka and later the Indian government, we got the first ever UN resolution on sustainable nitrogen management in March 2019. The modalities of implementation of this resolution are being discussed fast, and rest assured INI will play its role in its implementation as well. Also, thanks to the Sri Lankan government, UNEP launched the first global nitrogen campaign to halve nitrogen waste in last September 2019. Also, thanks to the German government, we now have the first ever INI conference fully sponsored and hosted by a national government. This has never happened in the last 20 years. The increasing role of governments in the very last few years is great news for INI, as this is what we advocated for 20 years. We will continue to play our pioneering role in evidence-based policies at the national, regional, and global level. Of course, INI is preparing for it, for the road ahead. We have a vice chair, you just heard him, David Kanta. We have decided to open a new INI regional center for Australia and New Zealand. And we are even considering national INI hubs to boost local action. Our director for African Regional Center, Kargele Masso, has been replaced with Vincent Aduramigba. And our directors for North America, Jill Barron, and for Latin America, Jean Ometo, have completed their terms and wish to move on. So we thank them for their contributions to INI and best wishes to the road ahead. In the next few days, there will be an advertisement for honorary directors to our regional INI offices in North America, Latin America, and Australia and New Zealand. Please keep track of the INI website or send your nominations to me or to members of the steering committee so that we can take them into consideration. I'm sure you will enjoy this action-packed webinar as a great curtain riser to the main conference to be announced later. Thank you very much. Have a good time.
Thank you very much, Raghuram. Marcus, I hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. Dear colleagues from all around the world, normally today would have been the day where we as the organizing team of INI 2020 would have welcomed you all in Berlin to open the 8th International Nitrogen Conference. Or even already yesterday, we would have met each other in a spring-like weather during our welcome reception on a boat trip through the heart of Berlin. But that's not the case. The pandemic is a new challenge for us all and captivates us all in our home countries. And here we are, meeting us virtually on a computer screen. So in the name of all the colleagues of the organizing team at our partner institutes, Akademie Dr. Opladen and N2 the Third, at the Federal Environment Agency, at the Federal Ministry for the Environment, and also in the name of the Scientific Committee and the national and international advisory boards, in the name of all those who have been helping so much during the last 2.5 years to set up the 8th Nitrogen Conference in Berlin, I now would like to welcome you very much to the first INI Global Nitrogen webinar. At the same time, I would like to stress our ongoing efforts to find a solution for a postponement of the in-person conference as soon as possible. It is currently our vision to hold the conference in the first quarter of 2021, which would give us all the opportunity to continue working with your interesting and current scientific contributions. With that, thank you all for submitting more than 400 valuable abstracts to our organizing team. Please give us some more time to announce further details of the postponement. We hope to have them ready for you within the next few weeks. For those who cannot wait so long with a refund of already paid participation, please approach to our conference secretariat and we will find a timely solution for you. We will announce next steps with our next newsletter within this week. So yeah, that's enough from my side. I now wish you an interesting meeting of the virtual program. And last but not least, please don't forget to check the virtual poster exhibition on ini2020.com/posters. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Yes, a timely reminder that we do have, I believe, about 20 virtual posters on the INI website And this was at least one way to continue some kind of interaction amongst the nitrogen community. With that, we're lucky to have a video from the president of the German Environment Agency that I'm going to show with you now. So I'm going to share my screen and share sound. All right, now, hopefully we will get to the message. Go here.
Dear participants from around the world, dear Nitrogen community, welcome to this virtual meeting, which is something like a small foretaste of the actual Nitrogen conference. You know that in order to mitigate the coronavirus and the spreading of the coronavirus, we unfortunately had to cancel our conference, which has been planned for 2020. In fact, we were very pleased when the International Nitrogen Initiative decided in 2017 to hold the eighth Global Nitrogen Conference with the German Environmental Agency, UBA, ourselves, and the Federal Ministry for Environment in Berlin. Our both institutions, the Ministry and UBA, the German Environment Agency, are elaborating and working on integrated approaches on making the various reactive nitrogen issues more visible to the public and to the policy arena. The German Environment Agency is involved in national and international activities related to reactive nitrogen for more than 20 years. All our national activities are actually embedded in European and international strategies, especially since nitrogen is of interest in Europe and globally in terms of environment, economic and food policies. The conference already attracted numerous of national and international scientists, industrial stakeholders, private sector people and policymakers. And we are proud that this conference is so attractive to so many people. This is essential for fruitful exchanges, for networking, for cooperation within the science community and between the science community and various stakeholders. And this is a strong support for sustainable nitrogen management globally. We therefore very much hope that the conference will actually take place then next year in Berlin in 2021. Reactive nitrogen is the central issue the International Nitrogen Initiative is primarily focusing on. In a world with growing world population, nitrogen is absolutely essential for food security and in terms of food production. But it is also the reason for negative impacts, negative environmental impacts in water and land ecosystems, in terms of impacts on air quality and human health, and it is accelerating and intensifying climate change dynamics. As you can see, the nitrogen issue is highly intervened in the global sustainability debate. As all of you know, reactive nitrogen is being emitted to the global biosphere with increasing annual rates. The harmful releases of reactive nitrogen already exceeds what we call the planetary boundaries. Through anthropogenic processes, the natural rates of nitrogen fixation have been multiplied since industrialization. There are two main processes that lead to increased fixation of accelerating rates of the emission of nitrogen. The first one is the combustion of fossil fuels and following nitrogen oxide formations. And secondly, the industrial nitrogen fixation, which forms ammonia from elementary atmospheric nitrogen. The industrial nitrogen fixation today is the origin of 2/3 of reactive nitrogen being fixed annually. However, these two processes play an important role in almost all facets of modern life. Therefore, nitrogen is a systemic challenge because it is related to nutrition and food security, to mobility, to energy production, the production and consumption of goods, and leisure. So nitrogen policies do have and do need systemic solutions. The transition towards a resilient and sustainable world is closely connected to sustainable nitrogen management. This is what our conference is about. Over the past 100 years, there have been no other geochemical cycles and processes in which humans have intervened as much as in the nitrogen cycle. Its sound management is absolutely essential for the next 100 years to come and beyond. Nitrogen is part of the SDG agenda and part of what we call the transformations towards sustainability. So here are some thoughts about how solutions might look like, or how cornerstones of solutions might look like. The first thing is that global, regional and national governance is needed in order to manage equal distribution of nitrogen and in order to minimize the negative effects that the emission of nitrogen into the environment has. UBA, the German Environment Agency, conduct comprehensive research on these kind of issues. The research projects of our agency deal with the science-based support of the strategic approaches, integrating different levels of governance, local governance, national governance, regional governance, and global governance of nitrogen dynamics. They cover issues like a national nitrogen budget, the integration assessment of measures and instruments to reduce reactive nitrogen emissions to the environment, and an integrated target value for reactive nitrogen at national levels. For Germany, this means we have to reduce our nitrogen emissions in our country by around 500 kilotons annually in order to achieve our national 2030 target. This is a huge challenge. With your research, with research of our research community, we all contribute to the necessary development of processes and technologies and innovations. This will help to minimize undesirable nitrogen releases and will support innovation processes for the efficient recovery and utilization of previously unusable nitrogen components. A change in lifestyle and daily habits is necessary to solve the problem. How can such changes look like? Reduce the use of private vehicles and air transport, and also the reduction of use in animal food products are part of the solution. We all understand and know that these kind of nitrogen policies at the end of the day imply that we need to discuss about transformation processes, deep ones, in different sectors of our economies and societies, nationally, in our regions and worldwide. Politics play a very important role to take the right measures and to accelerate sustainable practices in this field. From the scientific perspective, measures are needed in the agriculture sector, for example, through the implementation of nitrogen surpluses fees, for example, through the sustainable link between livestock farming and the use of land use, and other practices. An additional element or measure in the field of agriculture could be mandatory requirements for the application of farm manure. We also need to think about measures in the transportation and mobility sector, which can be of importance and are of importance for nitrogen policies, such as, for example, the alignment of tax rate for diesel with the tax rates for petrol on the one hand side, and on the other hand side, the introduction, for example, of a maximum speed of 120 kilometers per hour on highways. As I already mentioned, policy programs are most effective, obviously, when they are embedded internationally, when they are embedded in international strategies. Today's meeting, with our focus on global perspectives on nitrogen issues and SDGs, is important to exchange and to discuss common approaches. The Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations are closely linked with the nitrogen cycle. A lot of discussion has been moving around this kind of challenge, and what we could demonstrate is that at least 9 SDGs are directly related to the nitrogen use and the nitrogen cycle. To achieve these goals, we need an effective nitrogen management. The following keynotes and discussions will help to get more insights into the links between nitrogen, the nitrogen cycle, and the SDGs and the overall SDG packages in different world regions. They will support research and they will support further action. I would like to thank you and thank all of the participants of this virtual gathering, and then even more so of the hopefully physical gathering and conference in 2021. It is great to see how your work is tackling the nitrogen problem and how our research is pushing forward measures to solve the nitrogen-related sustainability challenges. I wish you all in these tryings the best during the next months to come. Please stay healthy, please stay creative in your research, and see you hopefully soon in 2021 during the Nitrogen Conference in Berlin.
All right, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much to President Messner for that great message, particularly linking nitrogen and the Sustainable Development Goals and highlighting its complex relationship, both as an essential nutrient and as a major pollutant, and also highlighting some really interesting and innovative policy measures and integrated policy measures that could help address this problem. Now let's get to our first keynote of today. This is Professor Xin Zhang, who is currently an assistant professor at the University of Maryland, their Center for Environmental Science. The goal of Xin's current research is to evaluate how socioeconomic and biogeochemical processes like nitrogen affect the global nutrient cycle and the sustainability of agricultural production. I am proud enough to call her a good friend, and Xin, please, let's hand it over to you. I think I've enabled you to share slides, so to share your screen. So hopefully you should be able to do that and take it away.
Could you all see my screen?
Yes.
Let me show the slides. Is looking good? Okay. Could you hear me okay, David?
Yes, we can hear you great.
Great. Well, thank you, Chair, for the invitation and also the introduction. I'm charged to talk about the current states of nitrogen around the world. And I would like to start off with sharing those maps that for nitrogen dioxide concentrations before and during the COVID-19 pandemic in China and Italy. And this is a rare opportunity for us to reflect on how much of the impact we have been imposed on the environment. And such a startling difference has suggested that it is possible for us to drastically cut the emission. But the question is how much we are willing to sacrifice our day-to-day convenience, or how much we will be able to innovate in order to cut emission while still maintain certain lifestyles. So the nitrogen dioxide concentration is only a small fraction of reactive nitrogen that we added to the Earth system. So this figure shows a historical record of reactive nitrogen inputs from human activities to the Earth system through fertilizer application, biological nitrogen fixation, and fossil fuels. And the nitrogen dioxide emission that we're seeing from the previous map is mainly fall into this yellow category. And for the other two categories is mostly associated with crop production. And it accounts for over 90% of the total reactive nitrogen that human activity added to the Earth system, which is even higher than the total nitrogen fixation by the natural habitat in the ocean or on the land. So what are the consequences of loading so much of nitrogen into our Earth system? So this is a simplified view of the nitrogen cycle in the Earth system. And the blue arrows shows the undisturbed nitrogen cycle among atmosphere, land, and ocean. And those orange arrows track the amount of nitrogen human activity has added to the Earth system. As you can see, those additional nitrogen added by the human activities has increased the accumulation of nitrogen in the atmosphere, land, and ocean. The accumulation in the atmosphere in the form of ammonia and NOx has led to significant regional air problems, and the accumulation in the waterways and oceans has led to issues such as eutrophication and dead zone. So besides those regional impacts, the adding reactive nitrogen to the Earth system has also impact on the global scale. The first reason is that the nitrous oxide emission, which is a byproduct from the denitrification process, is a prominent greenhouse gas, and it's also the most abundant ozone depletion gas. And secondly, and maybe more importantly, for the one atom of nitrogen that we added into the Earth system, it can change its forms and circulate around among the Earth system and have multiple environmental impact. And the only way to stop the adverse environmental impact will be convert it back to the inert nitrogen gas. And through those processes, the nitrous oxide would also be emitted as a byproduct. Consequently, it has been recognized that the human disturbance to the nitrogen cycle has already surpassed the planetary boundary. And this is a demonstration of the estimated planetary boundary for the nitrogen input into the Earth system. And as you can see, our current input has already passed twice of the upper bound of this estimated boundary. So we are having a problem of too much nitrogen added to the environment. But meanwhile, we also have a problem of having too little of nitrogen left on the plate. Currently, we're adding about 190 teragram nitrogen for agricultural production annually, but only 30 teragram was actually consumed by human beings as food, fiber, and fuel products, resulting in efficiency of nitrogen use for the whole agri-food system of about 16%. However, even with this 30 teragram of nitrogen produced by our food production system, it's possible to feed the world population with the basic nutrition protein needs. But due to the unequal distribution of our food availability across different income levels, we're leaving too little on the plate for those who need the most. And those challenge of too much and too little is also evident across the world region. So this is a world map of nitrogen fertilizer inputs for the year 2015. Well, we are seeing a very intensive nitrogen application in countries like China and India, and also the US Corn Belt. The nitrogen input into the African continents remain very low. And this figures shows the yield response to the nitrogen input, with the x-axis as the nitrogen input and the y-axis as nitrogen yield. And the different colored dots shows records from different years, with the red color shows the earlier years and the blue color as the recent years. As you can see here, for the sub-Saharan Africa, the nitrogen input and nitrogen yield are both remain very low, and the yield is about 1/5 of the level in China and America, which provides very limited nutrition for local population. And meanwhile, having too little of nitrogen input into the soil also expose the soil to the risk of soil nitrogen mining, and also degrade the soil health. So neither too much or too little is desirable, and how we can get it right. So one approach has been often discussed is improving nitrogen use efficiency. So the idea is, if we can remove all the nitrogen that we added to the system as food products, we can possibly meet the food demand with a minimum impact on the environment. Therefore, it's important to understand how nitrogen use efficiency is defined, how it has been changing, and what are the challenges and opportunities associated with the change. So what is nitrogen use efficiency? For a defined system, nitrogen use efficiency is defined as how much of the input will be converted as a products and leaving the system. So essentially, it's an input and output ratio of nitrogen for a given system. And it can be defined from a soil plant system to the agro-food system, or all the way to the landscape system. And this definition could be also applied on different spatial scale, from farm scale all the way to global scale. And take the crop production as an example, which is one of the soil plant system. Nitrogen enter into the system through fertilizer, manure, biological nitrogen fixation, and deposition. Part of the nitrogen will be harvested as a crop product. Some will be accumulated and recycled within soil, and much of it, more than 50%, will be lost to the environment. And based on this system definition, you can account for the nitrogen use efficiency as a harvested nitrogen divided by nitrogen input, and the nitrogen surplus as a difference between the input and output, which is also an indication of the impact on the environment. So how the nitrogen use efficiency has been changing globally. So this figure demonstrates the two typical efficiency that are important for crop production. The x-axis is land use efficiency, which is yield, and y-axis is the nitrogen use efficiency. And the gray color scale shows the nitrogen surplus concentration, and which is indication of the environmental impact. So the global nitrogen use has been changing drastically in the past 50 years, with a continuous increase in crop yield, but a significant drop in nitrogen use efficiency since 1960s. We are experiencing a turnaround in 1980s, and it's gradually levels off in the recent decade. So in order to meet the 2050 food demand, the nitrogen yield need to increase from the current about 60 kg per hectare to about 90 kg per hectare. And meanwhile, in order to bring the nitrogen pollution back to the planetary boundary, the nitrogen use efficiency need to increase from the current 45% to about 70%. So what are the different, so how far we are from reaching these targets for different part of the world? So those are the trajectory for different countries for the past 50 years. As you can see here, all of the countries has been moving to the right-hand side of the figure, searching for higher yield. And most of the country has been moving downwards, especially at the earlier intensification stage. And only a few countries such as US and France has shown a turnaround and the increase in nitrogen use efficiency in recent decades. So what has enabled such an improvement in those countries? Let's take US corn production as an example to explore this question. So the figure on the right shows the nitrogen use efficiency record for the US corn production, and the figure on the right shows the nitrogen fertilization rate and the yield level. And the slope of this dashed red line is determined by the fertilizer to crop price ratio. So given those information, you can estimate a yield response function, a representative yield response function for the US corn production for the past 50 years. And it demonstrates 3 different stages of yield intensification and corresponding to the changes in nitrogen use efficiency. So from the 61 to 1971, the yield increase are more or less following the similar yield response function, showing the yield increase are mainly achieved by adding more nitrogen fertilizer, and meanwhile, nitrogen use efficiency decline. From the 1971 to 2001, the yield increase are achieved by adopting those technologies and management practices that increase yield but require more nitrogen inputs. As a result, the nitrogen use efficiency levels off or decline. And from the 2001 to 2011, 2011, the yield increase is mostly achieved by adopting the technologies that require similar or less nitrogen input. Consequently, you see a drastic increase in the nitrogen use efficiency. In contrast, China has been following a quite different path. And this pink color line shows China's record. And the yield increase in China is more or less following the similar yield response function, suggesting the yield improvement is mainly achieved by adding more nitrogen or implementing the technology that require more nitrogen inputs. And this trend is mostly driven by the heavily subsidized nitrogen fertilizer. And the graph on the right shows the record of fertilizer to crop price ratio in China. And as you can see, the fertilizer to crop price ratio currently in China is about 1/4 of the level in the US, providing a very limited incentives for farmers to manage their nitrogen more efficiently. But this is only part of the reason for the much lower nitrogen use efficiency for crop production in China. So this is a record shows the nitrogen use efficiency for the China's and the US. If we can manage to improve China's nitrogen use efficiency to match the US level for every single crop types, this is how much difference it can make. It only accounts for half of the difference between China and US, and the other half is driven by the very different crop mix that two countries are producing. The major difference is that US is producing a lot more nitrogen soybean, which is nitrogen fixing plants. And meanwhile, China is devoting about 1/3 of its nitrogen fertilizer into fruit and vegetable production, which is typically less efficient than most other crop types. So in order to meet the 2050 food and environmental targets, different countries are facing very different challenges. For US and France, they are more or less on the track of achieving these targets, but it's still necessary for them to continuously develop and implement technologies and management practices in order to make up this gap in nitrogen use efficiency. And meanwhile, for countries like China and India, it's critical for them to halt the down spiral trend of nitrogen pollution by gradually phasing out the fertilizer subsidies and provide the policies that incentivize more efficient nitrogen management. And for China, I think it's also important to devote resources for improving nitrogen use efficiency for fruits and vegetable production, in addition to the cereal crops, and consider to relieve some of the domestic nitrogen pollution through trade. And for countries such as Africa, the priority is to increase crop yield, and the challenge is to achieve the yield increase without sacrificing too much of the nitrogen use efficiency. And it does urge the international collaborations in forms of technology transfer and capacity building. So far, we have been focusing on the nitrogen use efficiency in crop production because it accounts for most of the reactive nitrogen we added to the Earth system, and also the large fraction of nitrogen lost to the environment. However, in order to address the nitrogen challenge, improving the nitrogen use efficiency for crop production system alone is not sufficient. Globally, as we move from the crop production system up to the agriculture system, by including the animal production, the nitrogen use efficiency dropped from 43% to 22%. And this could be attributed to mostly the low nitrogen use efficiency in livestock production and also the insufficient recycling of livestock manure. But when we move up to the agri-food system by including the whole food supply chain and food consumption, then the nitrogen use efficiency dropped further to the 16%, which could be mainly attributed to the food waste throughout the supply chain and also the dietary and consumption patterns. Therefore, addressing this too much and too little of nitrogen challenges would require systematic changes beyond the crop farm and throughout the food system. So recently, another opportunity has been proposed to improve the world nitrogen use efficiency, namely by reallocating the nitrogen and food production around the world. And this is a simple illustration of such opportunity. Essentially, by adding the same unit of nitrogen into the different world region, the yield increase could be very different. Consequently, we can reach the same food production targets by reallocating the nitrogen to the places that can benefit the most from it. It might be seems idealistic to convince Chinese farmers to apply less and apply those nitrogen to Africa. But the current existing international trade network has already started to facilitate such a reallocation. But it's need to be noted that such reallocation, while efficient for nitrogen, has also led to many unintended consequences, such as deforestation in Brazil and the reductions in the resilience of food supply system. So it's important to recognize that addressing the nitrogen challenge should not lose sight of other important aspects of sustainability. And a comprehensive evaluation of agriculture's impact on sustainability and resilience of food supply system is urgently needed. In order to address this need, we are working with a group of scientists, including David on this panel, to develop an indicator system to assess the impact of agricultural production on social, economic, and environmental dimension of agricultural sustainability, and use those indicators to assess the trade-offs and synergies among various sustainability goals. I will be presenting some of the work at the FAO seminar next week, and you are welcome to join us to learn more. So overall, I hope I delivered to you that the human activities are adding the reactive nitrogen to the Earth system at the rate far exceeding the planetary boundary. And our nitrogen management is facing several too much and too little challenges. And in order to address those challenges, improving nitrogen use efficiency is critical, and it requires not only the technological advancement, but also the improvement in the social economic conditions. And in order to meet the food production and environmental targets in 2050, we need to improve the nitrogen use efficiency for crop production from 40% to 70%. But it's also important to enable the systematic changes throughout the food system. So with that, I would like to acknowledge my collaborators and also the funding agencies to support our research work. And thank you for sharing this 20 minutes with us during this very challenging time. With that, I would like to hand it over to David, maybe.
Thank you so much, Xin, and thank you for, there aren't many academics when you give them a chance to speak that they stay within the time limit. So I am grateful for that. And thank you for your excellent talk. There are several questions in the chat bar. I'm really grateful for everyone being so engaged in this. I will try in the 5 minutes we have to perhaps summarize some of them into a couple of kind of nuggets here for Xin to address. One seems to be about kind of the trajectory of nitrogen use efficiency across time in different countries. So specifically, there was questions, for example, from Yoshitaka Shida about why NUE was so high in the early part of your data set, and also why then the trajectory in certain countries like the US, this is a question from Marcin Dziskowski, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing your names wrong, about what drove those improvements in nitrogen use efficiency. So if you can just speak perhaps briefly to how the trajectory of nitrogen use efficiency has evolved.
Well, so maybe I can bring up my slide again. So then this might be easier to discuss it a little bit further. Let's say, so I think maybe just use this this figure as a simple illustration. So the x-axis is the nitrogen input and y-axis is yield. As you can see that this red line could be one typical yield response function, which demonstrate that as we for a given farm and given climate and technology conditions, as you adding more nitrogen fertilizer, the yield would likely to, so the yield increase would likely to levels off because the other limiting factors for yield growth become more important. So because we have such type of diminishing return in the yield response to nitrogen input, you can see a very high nitrogen use efficiency at the very early stage of this curve, which means that when you add very little nitrogen input, but the larger fraction of the nitrogen is likely to be harvested as a yield. But at the later stage of the intensification, the yield, the nitrogen use efficiency tends to decline as you adding more nitrogen input because of such a diminishing return. And you can achieve the yield increase with maintaining the nitrogen use efficiency or increasing the nitrogen use efficiency by shifting your production level from one yield response curve to another. So that can be benefit from the implementation of management practices such as, say, controlled release fertilizer or better irrigation or improved cultivars. And so for US, a lot of the recent NUE improvement in recent years are benefiting from the shifting across those yield response function, or in other words, the management adopting more efficient technologies and management practices. I hope that addressed some of the questions.
Yes, thank you, Xin. And also, I was reminded, yes, if you are posting questions, if you could post it to everyone in the meeting and not just the panelists, that should be an option where you post it to everyone so everyone can see your questions. Many questions here that we can't, unfortunately, we can't get to, but I will save the chat and send it to Xin, and you are welcome also. Hopefully, I'm not speaking out of turn, Xin, but if people want to contact with more questions about the presentation or your work, they can reach out to you and to the I&I steering committee. Perhaps one final reflection from, there are several questions around future trajectories, particularly in agricultural land use, and the amount of land devoted to agriculture is shrinking, and yet the amount of people that are going to need to be fed increases. What you think, looking ahead, the likelihood is of being able to stay below certain thresholds for nitrogen use efficiency and nitrogen more generally?
Yeah, so I would think that's an excellent question, and I think that does make our challenge for achieving the food production and reduce nitrogen or environmental targets more difficult to achieve, because so what I presented for the 2050 yield targets are estimated based on the assumption that our agriculture land maintain the same as the current years. But if we have to, if we are having the more degraded lands and or meanwhile have a shrinking in the agriculture production land area, then that means that we have to further intensify the production on the limited amount of land. And that pose even more bigger challenge for our current nitrogen management system.
Thank you.
If you are would like to talk to me more or have other questions, you're welcome to email me. and I know that the 5 minutes is not the very sufficient time to have answer all your questions, but I do see the questions here, and actually I got a little bit distracted from the question during the presentation, but I really appreciate all the interesting questions. I will try to get back to you on those.
Thank you so much, Xin. Now let's go to our second keynote for today, which is Professor Mark Sutton. So Xin, perhaps if you can stop sharing your screen. Yeah, perfect. And then we'll get Mark in. So Mark is a scientist at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology based in Edinburgh. He's currently leading the development of the International Nitrogen Management System, INMS. Many of you may know him as a former chair of INI as well. So INMS is a system of science evidence support for international policy development in partnership with the UN Environment Programme and with the Global Environment Facility and obviously the INI community. He's also the director of the South Asian Nitrogen Hub, which is a £20 million research platform funded by the Global Challenges Research Fund of the UK Research and Innovation. He is co-chair of the UN European Commission, Economic Commission for Europe Task Force on Reactive Nitrogen under the Air Convention. So Mark, without further ado, please take the floor. And you have to unmute yourself.
That will be even better. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. And can you see the slide?
Not yet. Not yet.
Thank you.
Now, yes, now it looks, yes, now we can.
Okay, well, thank you very much, David. Thank you, everybody. So nitrogen international policy developments, where have we been going? Where are we at? I think I should be a scientist sometimes, but I have to say I find myself filling an awful lot of time in the policy engagement. I would encourage others to do it. I think it's very worthwhile, but bear in mind, substantial time is needed. So why nitrogen? And I think this crystallizes it. It's not just another problem. Rather, it must be part of the solution if we are to make progress with so many of the pollution problems, other problems we already know across the whole SDGs. So let's start with the question of, should we be talking about nitrogen or nutrients? Many of you will have seen this nitrogen cascade before. We've got unreactive nitrogen fixed. I've put phosphorus on here as well, the car combustion, producing all these different forms of nitrogen to the air. Those start reacting out of the livestock, reacting together, cascading through the system until it's ultimately denitrified back again to dinitrogen. And along the way, producing all of these issues. So I think comparing the phosphorus challenge with the nitrogen challenge, phosphorus, we've got a resource issue, we've got water, but with nitrogen, we're facing this pan-dimensional challenge of all sorts of issues. So nitrogen is a special challenge, and meanwhile, it's forcing us to make connections with other nutrient cycles, not just phosphorus, carbon, sulfur, silica, etc. So let's say we haven't forgotten the other nutrients, but nitrogen is giving us a focus to cross the boundaries. In distilling all of those threats, we boiled it down some years ago to the 5 key threats of why worry about nitrogen, and make an acronym at the same time. The wages of imbalanced nitrogen: water quality, air quality, greenhouse balance, climate, ecosystems, soil quality, and we can add into that stratospheric ozone depletion as well. The point is, it's complex, but if you take action on nitrogen, you're going to have a hit with all of these issues simultaneously, as well as food security. So let's just look at a few of the effects. And we say that nitrogen is everywhere and invisible, is doing things you don't always appreciate it. When it comes to coral damage, for example, and this is me having a chat with a turtle about one piece of coral. That's the last piece of coral there. The rest is dead. Why was this dead? How much was due to temperature? How much was due to nutrient enrichment? This is directly downstream of agricultural activities in the Maldives. And of course, wastewater is a problem too. This is a recovering site, but only seen in a very clean location there. Moving on to air pollution, here's a picture of India Gate in New Delhi. Very hazy in the air pollution there. nitric oxide, nitrogen dioxide, moving through to nitrate particulate matter, and the NOx there are the combination of two gases. But not to forget, the ammonia emissions are coming up, particularly from agriculture, but also from traffic, making ammonium nitrate particulate matter, contributing to these health issues, the lung, heart issues. Recent here discussion on whether the air pollution is going to be making people more vulnerable or suffer worse as a result of COVID. And of course, a whole host of other issues. Same nitrogen that's doing them. I've added in there trimethylamine. It's not just the main compounds, but a whole host of other nitrogen compounds, particularly when it comes to low volatility for forming aerosol. On to biodiversity. The colorful is a sphagnum, and the brown one is a dead sphagnum as a result of ammonia, air pollution, a form of nitrogen coming from farms and then landing on ecosystems, killing off biodiversity. And that's not just a biodiversity issue, but it's a people issue. This photograph is from the Dutch Stikstof crisis, means nitrogen crisis. For them, it's a political crisis. The interesting thing is, of course, it's not just a Dutch issue. It's a regional European issue, and of course, a global challenge. They're embracing the question of, do we want to take action on nitrogen, or do we want to business as usual? So under this international nitrogen management system, you can see here the structure of the way we're working to support policy with the support from UNEP and the Global Environment Facility. You can see the tools and methods for understanding the nitrogen cycle, global, regional understanding of the flows, impacts, benefits, looking at the different regions, and several of the people as panelists will be involved in these regional activities and awareness raising. All of it leads in the end to hopefully a better basis for transformational change. And one of the issues I'll particularly pull up on is this question of policy homes. So let's just look towards the question of going towards a nitrogen circular economy, and what would a circular economy for nitrogen mean? And starting off with the present situation is really a linear nitrogen economy. We're making a whole load of fresh nitrogen compounds, and as that goes into cropping and livestock and food, as we've seen from Xinyang's presentation as well, we're depleting the nitrogen with huge losses to air, to water. The challenge is to transform then to a circular nitrogen economy, where all those resources are going back and being reused. And thinking about this, it seems to me this could be a nitrogen revolution we're looking forward to. And let's think about our past nitrogen revolutions. The revolution, and I'm not sure the exact date, when we first used biological nitrogen fixation, planting legumes. It's a long time ago. And then we started mining nitrogen out of the ground to use nitrogen products. And then we've been mining the atmosphere with Haber-Bosch and other processes the last 100 years. Well, I think embracing the circular nitrogen economy is the challenge for the next revolution. So let's go forward and look at a few of the things that have been happening the past year or so. The INMS has been established. We've established now regional activities, and you're hearing more about other regions as well. The nitrogen resolution at the United Nations Environment Assembly was agreed this time last year, and I'll say more about that. We've launched a campaign with the United Nations Environment Programme under the theme of Nitrogen for Life, under the lead of the President of Sri Lanka, and that's led to the Colombo Declaration with an ambition to halve nitrogen waste by 2030, and I'll say more about that. A first Nitro Innovation Exhibition, and even a nitrogen song with Grammy Award winner Ricky Cage. So the song is free. If you go onto YouTube, type nitrogen song Ricky Cage, you'll find the song. And now moving forward, the first meeting this summer of the Interconvention Nitrogen Coordination Mechanism. And I'll say something about these different things. So let's just take the question of making a nitrogen resolution. You want to set out and make a nitrogen resolution. This is no small task. And you need a strategy, you need partners, you need friends. To do this, we worked in International Nitrogen Initiative with INMS and with this South Asia Cooperative Environment Programme, taking a lead to work with the South Asian governments, drafting a first resolution 1.5 years ahead of the final adoption, and then involving the Director General, the Environment Ministers of South Asia, and then we need to take that across to the United Nations Environment Assembly, and that involves the Committee of Permanent Representatives. The great thing is that it was agreed that India would take the lead as lead country, proposing the nitrogen resolution into that system, and then ultimately negotiating it in the Environment Assembly, out of which we're now having this mandate of working towards this nitrogen working group to prepare the way for this interconvention nitrogen coordination mechanism. Well, here's the front page, and if you type either of those UNEP official numbers, you'll get the document. It's rather short, it's 1.5 pages. Rule number 1 of all good resolutions is that they should be short, and at the bottom you can see provision A, to consider the options to facilitate better coordination of policies across the global nitrogen cycle, national, regional, global scales, including considering the case to establish an intergovernmental coordination mechanism on nitrogen. And it goes forward from that. So the mandate now is there on the table for UNEP to work with other bodies internationally and go forward. And here's the picture. This is a picture published in the UNEP Frontiers report, and a statement there from Joyce Masuya, who was at that point acting executive director of UNEP. Now, if we look on the left of this diagram here, at the middle, we've got this interconvention coordination mechanism, which is in process, in preparation. We've got the different conventions, the Climate Convention, the Montreal Protocol, Convention on Biological Diversity, the GPA, that's for land, marine, environment, the Air Convention. And the point is, we want those to be talking together. At the moment, that group on air can't talk to the climate group. They've got different modalities. It's like oil and water. Procedures prevent the mixing. And by establishing this, we have an opportunity to feed and strengthen their work with information, with ideas about how it's all working together. And of course, it's not just these groups, but others, of course, welcome as the approach develops. But let's just think about 10 key actions, and we've heard a bit about that from the previous conversation. It's clearly agriculture is right in the heart of this, crops, livestock, manure, transport and industry, low emission combustion systems. And I think we need to hear a lot more about recapturing nitrogen oxides. Most technology aims to destroy nitrogen oxides. Wouldn't it be much more exciting if we can capture it, put it in a bag? In principle, there's something like a $50 billion a year resource available there. Waste water treatment, of course, and improving food supply and reducing food waste. Societal consumption patterns. I've put the number 9 in bold because there's an interesting contradiction. It seems we were all happy to have a conversation about energy and transport saving, but when we have the conversation about lowering human consumption of animal protein, when we're in excess, it becomes a very sensitive issue. But nevertheless, that is the challenge we face. Longer food chains have more losses. What is the right position to be in? And finally, spatial optimization, having the nitrogen in the right place, integrating livestock and cropping systems, etc., gives great opportunities. So there's some of the solutions, and I'm only going to talk about one particular question, one particular measure, which is biological nitrogen fixation the answer? Should we entirely give up making fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, and use biological nitrogen fixation? But there are lots of limits. The first thing to say is that it's a natural form of a slow release fertilizer. Because it's slow release, we would expect a smaller percentage loss to the environment. So a net good thing to the environment. But can it deliver enough nitrogen? That's a big question. Maybe it can't. There's an opportunity cost there. So next thing is that there are actually hot moments. And that, by that I mean moments when even biological nitrogen fixation contributes to pollution. There'll be people that tell you that biological fixation is without pollution. I don't agree with that. If you plow in a legume crop, there's going to be a risk of nitrate leaching, nitrous oxide emissions. Some will tell you that the future is the brave new world, nitrogen fixing a genetically modified wheat and rice so that no fertilizers are ever needed again. I think this is clearly exciting research, but I think on the other hand, most harvest currently goes to feed livestock in the world. And so whatever happens, we're going to need better urine and dung management. If we solve this question, we could end up making so much nitrogen, we multiply our pollution problems. So we say nitrogen is everywhere and invisible. Somebody said there was 9 SDGs. I think the president of UBA, actually you can make a narrative that says nitrogen is across all of the SDGs. And at the heart of this, we've started a conversation about halving nitrogen waste. That means reducing all nitrogen loss pathways, the sum total. And we launched that. I even wore a kilt for my 1 minute on air to get attention. We launched that in October 2018 as a commitment by the International Nitrogen Initiative. And I'm very happy to say that within a year, we've gone through Nairobi, the Nitrogen Resolution, to now the Colombo Declaration on Sustainable Nitrogen Management. This is immediate follow-up by governments under the UNEP process to follow up the nitrogen resolution from UNEA. And here you can see some of the statements about agreeing with it. Now let's take a few highlights. Agrees to endorse the roadmap, supports the establishment of the interconvention coordination mechanism, and down in 3.2, under national work to develop national roadmaps for sustainable nitrogen management with an ambition to halve nitrogen waste. So I think it's fair to say that INI has been catalytic here through INMS in taking this from a discussion to something that countries are really now taking seriously. And of course, the global implication is to halve nitrogen waste from all sources, and that means a potential saving of $100 billion a year annually. So the next steps, this nitrogen working group has been established to develop the terms of reference of the interconvention coordination mechanism, INCOME. First e-meeting on 8th and 9th of June. You can register through INMS and listen in, and it's going to be capturing the views of the intergovernmental conventions, capturing the views of the member states in working towards these terms of reference, a presentation from INMS and the international assessment to get advice from the member states as are we going in the right direction, and then of course a forward look on the emerging priorities. So moving forward, this halve nitrogen waste, I've taken a picture here of a pinball machine because I think we're starting to play nitrogen pinball. And that means you send the ball up here, and if you hit it right, it starts bouncing and bouncing and bouncing, multiplying points. And so let's say we've got this idea of halve nitrogen waste, and now we see it coming back again, bouncing. UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, having a conversation about halve nutrient pollution by 2040, pretty much related thing. And let's see if it multiplies further in different processes. It's an equitable approach because it means if you waste more action is needed. Before, in our nutrient world, we had a target of improved nutrient use efficiency by 20%. It was pointed out that if you were already high, you had to do more. Well, with this approach, the further away you are, with the more pollution you have, the more action is needed. Everybody should halve. A big challenge, massive economic and environmental benefits for air, land and water, and of course, massive business opportunities for the circular economy development. Now, this is a bit of an interesting guess, and I struggle with these numbers. How much ambition? But imagine 30% of fertilizer made from recycled sources by 2030. I'm not sure it's doable by 2030, but we're talking a massive challenge here for the future. And of course, opportunities for UNEA 5, UN General Assembly. So the bottom line to finish off, and nitrogen is affecting water pollution, climate, air quality, biodiversity, ozone, multiple SDGs. We've had fragmentation in the past. The Air Convention has done its thing, the Climate Convention, the water processes, all working rather separately. This joined up perspective offers a chance for multiple win-wins. Those win-wins can, of course, link to this whole halve nitrogen waste saving. The measures require better fertilizer, urine, dung, with business opportunities across all sectors. Now, this Colombo Declaration to halve nitrogen waste, save 100 billion annually, is clearly setting the terms. And I think one of the big questions going forward is going to be, what are the different trajectories by which you might achieve that? Because of course, it might be done in several ways. Whichever way you look at it, it's extremely ambitious. And not only that, but essential for the SDGs. And finally, the processes going forward. We've now got action in place to establish this nitrogen coordination mechanism, income to boost income. And this is talking here, making a reference to the circular economy, because if we want to save that $100 billion, that's a real opportunity. And not only that, in a post-COVID world where everybody says, this is all too much, all too difficult, the world we're saying for nitrogen is actually, this is opportunity and not just a problem if we want to meet all the SDGs and be good for business at the same time. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was a great presentation that really highlighted again kind of the multiple threats that nitrogen poses, and also the really exciting advances just in the past year or so in nitrogen policy, particularly at the international level. So thank you for that. I see that there are several questions. I would encourage you to reach out to Mark, just because we only have about 45 minutes left of the webinar, and we have a really exciting roundtable discussion. So I think it would be great if we can kind of move on to that roundtable to kind of kick things off, because the theme of the roundtable is nitrogen and the Sustainable Development Goals. I wanted to show a short video produced by a German NGO on nitrogen and the Sustainable Development Goals to kind of kick us off here. So I'm going to start sharing my own screen and just briefly show you then this video.
Dead fish, dirty drinking water and polluted air. Sound like a sustainable future to you? They're the result of too much nitrogen in our environment. Excess nitrogen is an underestimated threat to the environment, the climate and human health. But there is some good news. The United Nations have recognized this threat. The 17 Goals for Sustainable Development, the SDGs, are meant to solve our planet's nitrogen problem, but more on that later. Actually, nitrogen is essential for life on Earth. It helps plants and other living beings grow and reproduce. It enables a natural cycle of materials. Agriculture makes use of this cycle to produce food. Liquid manure from livestock is rich in nitrogen and functions as a natural fertilizer for plants. The amount of nitrogen in this natural cycle is limited. Therefore, life on Earth is naturally limited. 100 years ago, chemists developed a process to produce synthetic nitrogenous fertilizers. Natural boundaries were crossed. Food production increased exponentially, and with it, the world population. At the same time, and since the beginning of industrialization, the burning of fossil fuels has increased continuously. Harmful nitrogen emissions occurred as an undesired byproduct. The essential nutrient nitrogen has now become a problem. Excess nitrogen accumulates in the soil in large quantities and seeps into the groundwater. Biodiversity is lost. Lakes, rivers, and oceans become unbalanced. Nitrogen in the air harms human health and contributes to climate change. Global trade aggravates the problem. To enable intensive livestock farming in Europe, millions of tons of feed are imported from overseas. Nitrogen accumulates strongly in certain areas. Meanwhile, in other regions of the world, the nutrient nitrogen is scarce, and expensive artificial fertilizers are needed to grow crops. Back to the SDGs and the good news. All of us can contribute to a sustainable future by minimizing our nitrogen footprint. Switch to green mobility, eat less meat, value your food, and choose a green energy provider. Politicians and industry must enable the necessary changes, for example, by promoting nitrogen-efficient technologies and lifestyles, and by supporting nature-friendly agriculture and farming. We all need to take responsibility for a sustainable future.
All right, thank you very much. So now we have this panel on nitrogen and the SDGs, and I thought that was a good introduction. That was, again, that video was made by a German NGO working with the German Environment Agency. And one of the strengths of the International Nitrogen Initiative is the strong regional representation. And we have a panel across multiple time zones here and pretty much every major continent to talk about the challenges of nitrogen, whether it be too much or too little in different parts of the world. So I'm going to briefly introduce the panel here, and then we'll start with the first question. So Dr. Luis Martinelli is an associate professor at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil, and his research into ecology and geochemistry of the Amazon basin has earned him recognition as one of Brazil's leading scientists in this field. Dr. Vincent Abdurramikba is a senior research fellow and a developmental soil scientist at the Institute of Agricultural Research and Training at the Obafemi Awolowo University in Ibadan, Nigeria. He is also the INI Africa Director. Dr. Baojing Gu is based at Zhejiang University in China and also at the University of Melbourne in Australia. He is co-leading the cost and benefit analysis of global nitrogen use under INMS and has developed the coupled human and natural systems nitrogen cycling model. Professor Ramesh Ramachandran is the founder and director of the National Center for Sustainable Coastal Management as part of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change in India. His expertise includes coastal biogeochemistry and integrated coastal zone management. Carly Stevens is a senior lecturer at Lancaster University. She's a plant ecologist, a soil biogeochemist with an interest in how global change is impacting our environment, and she's particularly interested in how atmospheric nitrogen deposition is impacting ecosystems and their functioning. Suzanne Schmidt is a professor in the School of Agriculture and Food Sciences at the University of Queensland in Australia. She's a scientist and educator in ecology and agriculture with a focus on nitrogen in the soil microbe-plant interface. And her team is advancing methods for soil analysis, knowledge of the role of organic nitrogen in plant nutrition, and developing next generation fertilizers for a world without waste and pollution. And finally, we will get a reflection from Achim Doberman, who is the chief scientist of the International Fertilizer Association. As chief scientist, he provides strategic scientific advice to IFA's members. And before joining IFA in 2020, he served as director and CEO of Rothamsted Research in the UK, as deputy director general of the International Rice Research Institute, and a professor of soil science and nutrient management at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So thank you to all the panelists across, I think when the webinar started at 8 a.m. on the East Coast of the United States, it was 10 p.m. in Brisbane in Australia. And so all of those time zones in between, we really appreciate all of the panelists for being here. So what I'd like to do as a first question to really go across all these different regions is to ask each of you what the links are between nitrogen and the most important links between nitrogen and the Sustainable Development Goals in your specific region. So Professor Martinelli in Brazil, why don't we start with you? And you'll have to unmute yourself in the bottom left there.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. Let me take this opportunity just to say hello for some friends that I know that are listening, like Eric Davidson, Jean Galloway, Jan Willem Erisman from the past, from the INI in the Cretaceous when INI started. Also to Jean Almeto, Luis La Saleta, and Jill Barron. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, in Brazil, no, not in Brazil, in Latin America, we are not the least developed countries in the world, but we are not the most developed. Then we have this balance between problems that are related to N excess and problems that are related to lack of N. Then I would say that our major challenge is SDG number 2, zero hunger. We have to fight that. In some parts of Latin America, we simply don't have enough nitrogen. In other parts, this SDG number 6, clean water and sanitation, most of the sewage in Latin America is not treated. Then we dump a huge amount of nitrogen every year in Latin American water research, which are which corresponded to 34% of the total global water research. And that's a serious pollution problem that would affect mainly the poorest people that live in areas that are near rivers and streams all Latin America. And this call attention for the huge social inequality that we have in Latin America that aggravates the problem of too much N and too little N. Also, I have to say that Latin America has a problem of political instability, and as Mark said, policies matter a lot. And with all political instability, the problems that we have tends to aggravate. Also, Latin America is one of the most urbanized areas of the world, and we have several mega cities like São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Buenos Aires, Caracas, etc. All these cities, we have a problem of pollution, which is also emissions from transportation contributes a lot to NOx, NH3 emissions. But I think the most important problems in Latin America is lack of N in several key parts of Latin America, and also the problem of water pollution. And in heavily urbanized areas, we have this problem of atmospheric pollution, that emissions from car and industry helps to aggravate the problem. All of that encompassed by or surrounded by political instability and social inequality, which makes our problem even worse.
Thank you very much, Luis. Let's go to Dr. Aduramigba in Ibadan, Nigeria. If you can speak also to that same question about the links between nitrogen and the SDGs and perhaps the most pressing issues where you are. And let me unmute. Yes, okay, go for it.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. Greetings from Nigeria to all my colleagues and to everyone. Well, for us in Africa, let me say that the SDGs is very important because it covers both the social, the economic, and the environmental dimensions of sustainability. And the 17 SDGs is actually the way to achieve economic prosperity. But for us in Africa, the second SDG, which aims to end hunger, achieve food security and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture, is related to the economy, the society, and the environment. So for us, SDG 2, achieving it is the key and the success to all the entire 17 SDGs for us in Africa. What do I mean by this? Meeting the SDGs will involve multiple synergies and trade-offs with all the other SDGs. For example, to eradicate hunger, we need to align SDG 2 with the 4 pillars of food security stated by FAO, which involves availability, access, utilization, and stability. I'm taking too much time to talk about agriculture because for us in sub-Saharan Africa or the African countries, agriculture is at the heart of our economic development. If we cannot feed the populace, then we are going to run into a lot of problems. Of course, we are running into it already because nitrogen itself is at the heart of sustainable agricultural development in the region. So if you now talk about the environmental pollution, you talk about socio-economic effect, we also talk about the different sub-regions in the continent. We have a lot of imbalances. For example, in Central Africa and some part of West Africa, we have a lot of challenges. I'm sure that you are aware that I don't know what actually led to some of the conflicts we have in Africa, even in my country. and part of West Africa was actually more food. And now today we are battling with social unrest by Boko Haram in northeast Nigeria. The whole of northeastern Nigeria is already locked up. People are complaining of hunger. And we are having the same thing replicated in some parts also of West Africa, in East Africa, Somalia and other countries. So for us in the continent, the SDG is key. But of course, we have not seen much political will from our government. I think apart from two countries, if you pick Rwanda, Rwanda has done very well. And that's why you have the SDG African Center domiciled there. Then again, I think South Africa is doing well, and also Ghana. Apart from those three countries, all the other 51 countries in Africa are different levels of even understanding the concept. So the SDG is crucial, but nitrogen through SDG2 is the key to meeting the other SDGs in Africa. But we also hope that one of the panelists, I think it was Mark, when he was talking, sorry, I'm going to refer back, when Zane was talking about low end usage in Africa from her presentation. And I asked myself, crop yield at what cost for Africa? And nitrogen and the SDG is at the heart of this. I think let me stop here for now because there are some other issues I'll be discussing that actually link question number one with all the other questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vincent. Let's now go to Dr. Carly Stevens, maybe to also address the same question about kind of nitrogen and the SDGs in Europe.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. In Europe, we have the contrasting situation to Africa. Our biggest problem is too much nitrogen, misuse of nitrogen, and just pollution of nitrogen has become a major issue. And along with that, we see a whole host of links to the SDGs with impacts on ecology, biodiversity, biogeochemical cycles in water, in land. We see impacts on climate and very far-reaching effects. And it's become a very serious issue in Europe and other parts of the world as well. And really, the only thing that we can do to reduce that is to use less nitrogen. We need to be using less nitrogen fertilizers. We use more than we need, as we've seen in the previous presentations. Nitrogen misuse in agriculture is a real problem, but we also see large amounts of nitrogen pollution in the form of nitrogen oxide and vehicle emissions. We've seen those reductions very recently as we all stop traveling, as the industry is reduced, but it's still a very real problem and something that will increase again as soon as we're traveling again. So in Europe, without a doubt, too much nitrogen is the concern.
Thank you, Dr. Stevens. Let's go to Professor Ramachandran in India for your reflections on this question.
Hi, David. Thank you for calling me, as well as to Professor Raghuram. For the South Asia region, I would like to say that we are almost 8 countries, which nearly 24% of the global population, which we have about 5% of the global land mass, and also nearly 15% of the arable land. And we do have nearly 3% of the world forests and nearly 4% of the global coastline. And people have been talking about agriculture. We have too much of fertilizer. Now recently we have introduced the neem coated urea, which is slightly better than what we have been using earlier. But as far as India is concerned, that I think what I feel that we do have too much of food production. We have actually excess in take any cereal, either wheat or rice or sugar. We really too much of the agriculture products. Actually, nearly 55% of our population is involved in agriculture. I think you have to look at the strategies, how you have to move forward with other aspects. In terms of the most important thing, which in India as well as the entire South Asia, is the pollution, either it's from the sewage or from the agriculture runoff. I think we should be like nearly 70 to 80% of the sewage, which is not treated. I could give some examples, some data here. For example, we have nearly something like 38,000 million liters of sewage, which is going into the coastal cities and towns, which 70% is not even treated. So we also, it leads to a lot of toxic aquatic algal blooms, which results in depleting oxygen levels and fish death and loss of biodiversity, and also to undermine the realizations of the goals 16, 14, and 15. So one of the important things which so far, it is still in the limelight. People have been talking about, then huge research is going on right now, is looking at the dead zones. We have the major dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico, and the other one which few years back in the Arabian Sea. And the important one which the researchers, we found that in Bay of Bengal. In Bay of Bengal, it is now almost established 60,000 square kilometers of area. It comes under the dead zone, which is not completely confirmed. And the dissolved oxygen level is almost zero in about 100 to 400 meter depth, which is very serious problem. The oxygen depletion in the ocean, which is due to the natural causes as well as due to the human activities. There is a lack of oxygen. The ecosystem shift to anaerobic metabolism. That means that it becomes oxygen minimum zones to get energy by degrading organic matter in the process that remove vast amounts of nitrogen from the oceans. So this upsets the entire nitrogen balance. So we have a huge amount of the Bay of Bengal of the sewage which is coming into this one, the fertilizer runoff which is coming into the ocean. I think we need to have a more detailed research on this one. As a part of the sign-up which Mark has mentioned, that South Asian Nitrogen Hub, we are involved in the coastal as well as the ocean research to look at this area and then see these dead zones are really happening. And also we have a very big modeling team which will look at into the details of how far this can be much more established in this area. And if this is going to be a serious problem, and it is going to be a major tipping point for us in this research to eliminate that what type of impact it is going to have in the nitrogen cycle in the Bay of Bengal, and how the entire Bay of Bengal region is going to be affected because of this. And this is one of the major path-breaking research which is going to give us how important the nitrogen issues are here. So which have a huge impact on the fisheries as well as the livelihood of the entire Bay of Bengal region. The other aspect is about the air pollution, which the Indo-Gangetic Plain, we have the ammonium gas which is released. And then that is also an important, particularly for the major cities, where the pollution plays a major role, and nitrous, the air quality index, which plays an important role over a period of time. I think these are all the major issues I could think of when you take about the South Asian region, and maybe I can stop here.
Thank you so much, Professor Ramachandran. Already, just from these first four interventions, we're really getting a sense of the range and multiplicity of nitrogen impacts and needs around the world. Professor Schmidt in Brisbane, Australia, I think you win the prize for being up the latest. It is past 11:30 in Brisbane, Australia. So thank you so much. So why don't you go ahead and address some of the same question that other panelists have been addressing.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you everybody for contributing to this very interesting online forum. So I represent Australia and New Zealand tonight, and as you may know, it's quite a small amount of people, only about 30 million. Region of political stability, great biodiversity, and both countries are exporters of agricultural products. Australia exports grain and meat, and New Zealand dairy, so both very large industries, and also 3 industries. Both countries try to aim for a green, clean image, and I think in New Zealand it's increasingly obvious that the intensive livestock production, the dairy production, is really causing problems. So there are conflicts between environmentalists and agriculture, as in most countries that have large animal herds. So there's a lot of sort of changes needed in order to address the sustainable development goals like climate action, life below water, life on land, those sorts of aspects. In Australia, it sort of falls into 2 categories. We have systems that are over fertilized, like sugarcane and other sort of wet, sort of tropical agriculture in the state where I live, and that's been ongoing. And in sugarcane farming, for example, and others, horticulture, we haven't been able to solve the problem of excess nitrogen running into the Great Barrier Reef. And Mark alluded to that in his talk. So it's a huge problem. So the coral are dying from ocean temperature rises, but also from algal blooms and impacts on them through other sort of shifts in ecosystem. So that's sort of a big problem in Australia. The other extreme is similar to some of the previous speakers, is that we have too little nitrogen in some systems where degradation occurs. So we have a lot of arid zone systems that are grazed with extensive cattle grazing, and that's sort of slowly declining. So there's a lot of soil degradation and nitrogen being exported in the form of protein from those animals. So it's basically a sort of double-edged sword in both directions. Too little or too much. Climate action, I think, in both countries could probably be better, and there needs to be a lot done to some of the other sustainable development goals that we already discussed. But yeah, I think that's all for me for the moment. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Baojing Gu at Zhejiang University in China, would love your reflections on this question too.
Thank you, David. Talking to the East Asia, I think currently the major issue is excessive nitrogen. But first, we have to say that the use of nitrogen have a great contribution to the food supply in East Asia. Take China as a case, the crop production increased 5 to 10 times during since the establishment of China in 1949. So during the same period, the livestock production increased 20 to 30 times. It's a huge increase. Even for the agricultural production, it increased 140 times. It's a huge increase due to the use of nitrogen in China. So, but meanwhile, the nitrogen use efficiency is very low in China compared to other countries on the world. And we believe currently China is on the bottom of the nitrogen use efficiency curve. And meanwhile, we believe it's going to a transition that will increase in the future years, such as the zero nitrogen use in agriculture plan. That means the fertilizer use start to decline in China now. The similar issue actually have been found in South Korea, in Japan. They have a little bit higher nitrogen use efficiency compared to China, but among all the OECD countries, the nitrogen use efficiency in Korea and in Japan is the lowest actually. They have also have nitrogen pollution issues. And when we see the China, Japan, and Korea, we found that the smallholder farmers may be one of the main socioeconomic barriers that are leading to such a big issues due to all the advanced technicals have been developed for decades, but very few of them have been applied or implemented in China and other East Asia countries. And we believe due to the small farm size, it's very difficult for the farmers to adopt such kind of technique. And the farmers are really poor actually. So That means in the future, if we want to achieve a better national use efficiency in East Asia, we have to think about the socioeconomic issues related to farm size, related to how to implement such kind of policy-related issues to make a better future. Currently, the excessive nitrogen use have leading to serious air pollution, water pollution, biodiversity loss. And we just finished a calculation of the damage from ammonia emission from agriculture in China. It may lead to $20 billion loss each year. It's a huge one. So that means we're trying to, to balance in the future, try to balance the food supply and the energy supply, and trying to increase income of the smallholder farmers in East Asia, and meanwhile largely reduce the excessive nitrogen losses in East Asia. It's a huge challenge, but it also means a huge potential given such a low natural use efficiency and such a large amount of nitrogen loss to the environment. But meanwhile, we have to considering the socioeconomic issues in East Asia due to the large population there and the small farm size, and all the policy and the technical development have to take into the local issues. That's all.
Thank you so much. This was really a great overview in a condensed period of time of some of the multifaceted and yet shared challenges of nitrogen around the world. I encourage you, again, we'll have a couple of minutes for a Q&A with this panel. While the more questions are coming in, I just want to do a quick fire round, and perhaps we do it in the reverse order of how we did it before. We have a huge chunk of the nitrogen research community on this call right now. So it's a great opportunity for the panelists to perhaps highlight what they think is one particularly important question or issue that needs to be the focus of the future nitrogen research agenda. So perhaps, Baojing Gu, we can start with you. Again, just what you think is perhaps one of the most important issues that should be the focus of the nitrogen research community in the next few years.
Okay, thank you. For the future, I think the most important one, take East Asia as a case, we think the first step need to taking the farm size issue as a board, and then we'll think about how we deal with the high technique, such as there's a company in China called Huawei. Huawei, they make cell phones, but Huawei currently they start to involve in the internet plus agriculture. They're trying to use all kinds of sensors of 5G, trying to build a modern agriculture. And we believe such kind of changes will going very fast in China. But we have to understand how nitrogen cycle, nitrogen use, and nitrogen loss occurred in this kind of modern agriculture. It will change the way we deal with agriculture. And we have to understand how the technique interact with agriculture, and in such a transition period, especially under the COVID-19, it changes the way we deal with the agriculture, deal with the way we live and the way we consume. And meanwhile, we have to think about how smallholders involved in such kind of modern agriculture. And that means maybe we need less farmers in the future. And if we increase farm size, but meanwhile, we believe urbanization may have a contribution to the increase of farm size if we move more people from rural area to urban area in China and in East Asia. That's, I think, the future. We have to think about more social part of nitrogen. For the natural science part of nitrogen, it's very important. We need still to focus on the natural science part of nitrogen, but meanwhile, the socioeconomic part of nitrogen, and how we link the socioeconomic part, and considering the high technique, considering the policy issues, and considering the cost benefit. Since the farmers normally are poor and but the damage of natural loss to the environment is huge, we have to trade off, and maybe we have to think about whether we need to pay for these farmers to deal with their pollution. Actually, we already proposed a concept we call nitrogen credit. And if we want to solving the nitrogen issues through farmers, we have to build a credit system to allow the farmers get paid if they adopt some advanced technology, and they have to get some support or get some help from the government, from the whole public, not only themselves. If we leave all the nitrogen pollution to farmers alone, it will leading to a disaster due to their poor, and there are many of them is hard to supervise. So that's why we're trying. I believe that we're trying to balance the technology, balance the social and economic part, and the farmers' issue in the future for nitrogen studies.
Thank you very much, Baojing. I'm conscious of time. We only have about 12 minutes left, and I want to be sure to give enough time to Dr. Doberman to be able to provide reflection. So if we can focus perhaps on one specific issue that you think should be the focus of the future nitrogen research agenda. Let's go with you, Professor Schmidt.
I just, my interest is next generation fertilizers, and that's a sort of collective term pretty much of what we can do to make nitrogen be released more in synchrony with what the crop needs, and also sticking around in the soil for longer. So it's a combination of recycling waste and new technologies and new formulations. So we have really boosting efficiencies over current products.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Professor Ramachandran.
Yeah, I have a couple of things. One is the increase the use of efficient organic fertilizer. That could be one major thing, a challenge, which, for example, GBNF is one thing which India is trying. Maybe you have to look at into the much more details, and also the improve the performance of the synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, and also the waste technology. How do you reduce this waste, which has a huge impact on the coastal environment? And these are all the few major advancements which one can think of.
Thank you very much. Dr. Stevens.
I think in Europe, we still have a lot to learn about impacts of nitrogen within the natural environment, but particularly pertinent as we try and encourage policymakers to support policies around reducing nitrogen is showing them the benefits of that in terms of the impacts on the natural environment, and that the speed and the extent to which habitats can recover, and that's causing a lot of policy questions at the moment.
Thank you very much. Dr. Adura Migba.
Thanks, David. Well, I have many things, but let me just talk about three of them briefly. The first one is for us in Africa. I think we need to look at end-use efficiency technologies that we increase crop production through technical knowledge, using our what we call indigenous knowledge system that is tailored for the African continent. Then the other one we need to look at again is, I think we need to now collaborate with other regions and other developed countries on some projects, and also we need to have partnership and sustainability. And I'm happy to inform us. We already have a project, though it is not I&I project, but I think I&I will come on board. It is called Integrated Nitrogen Studies in Africa. It's funded by the European Commission for 1.24 million euros for 4 years. We have 8 institutions from Africa and 7 from Europe. So we are going to gather a lot of material that we'll share after the project with, I'm sure the other continents can also learn from us. So integrated, if you type INSA, we're able to see a lot of things and what we'll be doing across selected countries in Africa and also some countries in Europe. And finally, I think we need to have a platform for nitrogen that brings about a middle ground between the too little and too much. So that at the end of the day, everybody will have something That's what I'm saying. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Vincent. And finally, Professor Martinelli, please.
The sustainable agriculture in Latin America, because Latin America is a powerhouse, is the most important exporter of soy, coffee, beef, sugar, poultry, etc. Then we have to have the right management of hand in any rich areas and also in any poor areas, because as Dr. Shin showed us, use of hand is increasing happily in Latin America, but we are not increasing any efficiency. Then we have to be careful with that. And also we have to avoid ecosystems destruction. Destruction in Latin America involves fires that, increase any emissions and subsequently any deposition. And we have this mega biodiversity. Then I think Latin America is one of the only regions in the world that still can balance sustainable agriculture with preservation of its mega biodiversity. And the second point is sanitation, because sanitation is a win-win situation. You'd benefit human health and also would decrease any pollution in water resources of Latin America.
Thank you so much. I see a great and vibrant discussion in the chat bar. As we're getting to the end, I think it's probably best to have the Q&A in that chat bar, and we'll save the chat, and feel free to reach out to any of these panelists to ask them more specific questions. Dr. Doberman has been waiting very patiently throughout the course of this webinar. So Achim, please, we'd love to hear your reflections on this panel and on kind of what has been said throughout this event so far.
Yeah, thank you. Don't want to repeat too much of what has been said, but I think what I've been hearing is that even though we have a global goal or a set of global goals, in the end, we do need those to be translated into national targets and strategies and roadmaps and solutions when it comes to SDGs. And it's the same as nitrogen, because each region is at a different point in time, has had a different trajectory to where we are right now, has a slightly different set of challenges, and some even have much bigger challenges than others. So I think that's the big message for me from all of these things. And in the end, we need to find a pathway for each region or country that adds up to the global goal. And from where I stand now, having worked largely actually only in the publicly funded research until recently, now working more closely with industry, for me, it is very important that we also embed this kind of thinking essentially into every business. And I'm actually fairly optimistic there because we've had a significant change process going on also on the industry side, and just in the last 2 or 3 years, I would say, where there is an increasing level of embracing the general concept of sustainability, the SDGs, trying to turn those actually not just into corporate social responsibility, but actually make it part of new business strategies. Now, in the fertilizer industry, that is always a bit more difficult because you're sort of in the middle of, on one end, you can be just sort of like a commodity company. On the other hand, you also want to deliver increasingly more sophisticated solutions and products and services, and so know-how added value, and therefore also have a different business model. But I think the realization is there that we need to achieve a global good, a global goal through a more differentiated approach, and that's also a significant role of businesses. It's not going to be that easy because no matter what we do, and yes, we have still a lot of room to increase nitrogen use efficiency at a full chain level. We have a massive amount of potential in the recovery space and recycling space, but each of those is also a challenge itself. And I think by and large, we still have faced a near future of the next 20 or 30 years where on a global scale, on a total level, fertilizer consumption will continue to rise. I think that's the reality. Because other than that, it won't be enough to produce enough food to feed this rising population. Now, how much it will rise on a consumption level on a cropland basis, that's the interesting question. We are at 90 million tons consumption of nitrogen on cropland right now, roughly speaking. And it probably, if you do a business as usual scenario with a bit of improvement in nitrogen use efficiency and manure recycling, would still end up by 2050 to be probably 20 or 25% more than it is now. And if you really want to feed this world, nearly all of that increase, nearly all of it, would have to go to Africa. That is, for me, the biggest issue right now. You know? So we are at the consumption level in Africa of a little over 3 million tons, average rates in maize of 10 kilograms nitrogen per hectare per crop. But any projection that I've seen says, you know, if we want to feed at least at a reasonable level of higher self-sufficiency in Africa, that population that is growing there fast, we would be talking about a 10 to 15-fold increase in nitrogen consumption in Africa alone, whereas the rest of the world talks about cutting nitrogen. So what's the bigger challenge? You know, how do you do each of those in the right balance? And how do you actually then make this also a viable business? Because without business, it's not going to happen, neither of those things. So I've been very encouraged by the change that is happening in the industry. It's probably not fast enough yet. It's probably not broad enough yet. But we do have what we call a new paradigm for sustainable plant nutrition, or sometimes we call it our responsible plant nutrition. And it is based on more systems thinking, a more full sort of chain approach, increasing investments in innovation in particular, and also I think an increasing level of interest in the recycling and recovery side of things, including pilot plants that several big companies have invested in. I think we're at an early stage with many of these things. They're still not at a cost point or price point where it could be competitive enough. And many, many questions still to be answered from a technology point of view, from a regulation point of view, from policy support side of view, how you can incentivize things that improve nutrient use efficiency and recycling. But I think we're at least moving a little bit in that direction. And that is, for me, a cause of optimism, I would say. So I think what I would like to end with is basically a plea to all of those who work particularly in the research world to work more actively with also industry on many of these things. Because you will find increasingly open interest there. You may not always agree with each other on these things, but you need to work together on these things. And there's a lot that everybody can learn from each other. And particularly when it comes then in the end to also turn scientific ideas and theories into practice. That's what I'm very keen on, the translation of science into real innovation at scale is what makes it different. And it doesn't matter whether that is science that leads to green ammonia production technologies or novel fertilizers or in novel manure recycling technology, or perhaps the most important thing, how to equip 100 million farmers with the knowledge to manage nitrogen better in the field. Nobody can do this alone. Nobody has figured out how to do this properly. And I think it's only in the end through also that interaction with businesses that these things will work. So we would be very keen, I think, to see more of those efforts because it's one side to talk about nitrogen. It's much harder to actually do something about it, but obviously we need to do it. So please try it in each of your regions, and I think you will find increasing interest and industry in it.
Thank you so much, Achim, and thank you so much, everyone. I want to give Raghuram, the chair of INI, the final word. I do also want to thank all the panelists on this roundtable and all the keynotes. So you can see my daughter is ready for this to be over. So Raghuram, so just so you know, that this is being recorded and it will be posted on the INI 2020 website. Also, the chat will be saved and also will be posted on the INI 2020 website. So this was a great, vibrant chat, and I'm really glad this event was so well attended and that so many of you were engaged. So Raghuram, you have the final word.
Thank you very much, David, for conducting it and maintaining the time. The panelists have raised some very, very pertinent issues with respect to the various regions that they represent. The speakers have given a very good overview of the problem of reactive nitrogen being too much in many countries and too low in some countries. And this varies. It's not entirely a question of Africa. There are pockets of too little nitrogen even in India, even in Latin America. We mentioned about that. So there is uneven distribution of nitrogen usage even in agriculture in many parts of the developing world, including but not limited to Africa. That's a very important message that we have to take, because we cannot completely give up on reactive nitrogen. We just have to be able to use it sustainably. The other point that did come across from different speakers and also from the panelists is that there is a considerable scope for minimizing nitrogen wastage, either by using appropriate technologies to limit the amount of nitrogen input to the amount of crop demand, or by actually bringing back some of the wasted nitrogen from, you know, sewage or from solid waste or from manure or other sources, so that you have a dual benefit of reducing the environmental load and also helping the food production. So bring back the wasted nitrogen from wherever it is wasted to wherever it is needed the most. So we have to close the nitrogen cycle, and how to do it will vary from country to country, maybe from crop to crop. Different regions have to optimize their policies in accordance. In some countries taxation might work better, in some other countries something else might work better. So these are really the challenging issues that will keep us occupied in the years ahead, because we have a UN resolution for sustainable nitrogen management, and that's the biggest achievement that the nitrogen community has had in the last 2 decades. Now we are only talking about how to implement that resolution, how to tailor-make the solutions for different regions of the world and even for different sectors of the economy, from industry and transport. So this is where we need a lot of challenges in the future.
Thank you so much, Raghuram, and thank you everyone. We look forward to seeing you in Berlin. Also keep a lookout for those change dates, keep a lookout for ads for the INI regional center leads. Thank you so much, and see you all very soon. Bye.